And it's sure to get a conversation going. And also, I don't think he's here, right? He's not here. Pretty sure I'm safe.
We tried.
Well, good. So I can go ahead and pick on him. Now, I do so with some trepidation, though, and that's because these are popular and potent words. I bet you're going to be familiar with them, and most of you have heard of them. And I also mostly agree with what he's saying here. So he says, although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, which is one of these phrases that gets tossed about by creationists and religious people all over the place. They object to this as well. I'm going to object to it for slightly different reasons than they do. And maybe what I'm trying to do here is, this is a ploy to get you thinking about this stuff. So, I know what Richard meant by this, which I'll explain in a moment. But my main complaint with this is twofold. One is that, yes, you could be an intellectually fulfilled atheist without evolution, before Darwin. I know, that's almost heretical, but it's true, you could. And the second problem is that this statement doesn't kick ass hard enough. Because all of biology, not just evolutionary biology, demolishes what it disclaims. So first let me talk about what I think is reasonable about the statement, and then I'll tell you how the rest of biology fills in its shortcomings. Now, you see, the problem is that there are a lot of ways to define and explain a God. One of my complaints with the whole of religion is the incoherence of the whole concept, the central concept of religion wrapped around this God thing, and they can't even tell me consistently what it is. And what they'll do is they'll use this vagueness to nimbly deflect criticism of one concept of God by switching to another halfway through your conversation. So how often have you argued with a devout Christian? And a Christian, is somebody who has extremely specific beliefs about their deity. They immanentize that deity as a human being who did magic tricks on the shores of the Sea of Galilee 2,000 years ago. This is a very concrete, very specific complaint. And you'll start arguing with them, you'll be drilling down on the absurdity of this whole proposition, and then they'll suddenly turn around and say, oh, but wait, God is love. What? He's not a Jewish carpenter anymore? He's suddenly become this very diffuse thing that you can no longer address. It's still nonsense, but it's a whole different set of arguments you have to deal with. Or they'll tell you something like, oh, but his ways are completely unknowable. I agree, this makes no sense. That's why it's unknowable. And this is the fuzziness of religion in general. God can't be both Jesus and the ground state of all being at the same time. And I know Christians, if there were such a thing here, would be chiming in right now and saying, yes, he can, because he can do all things. But no, he can't. He cannot do all these incompatible, paradoxical sorts of things. If the God of Christianity can be all things, can be love, then I'm declaring myself God right now, and I expect you all to start tithing, and the virgins can line up right over here, right up at the top. It's ridiculous. Okay, but there is one specific God concept that is quite common and that we can address, and it's really hard for the believers to duck away from, and that's the concept of the Creator God. Now, we've often got these so mingled up that we think that God is just everything, so any role he can play. But in ancient mythologies, these were separate gods. These are gods with different roles. And there was the Creator God who made everything. The father figure was sort of God, but there were lots of other gods as well. So anyway, the Christian religion accepts the idea of Creator God. In fact, it's become far too much of a focus for much of Christianity, conservative Christianity, which regards any attack on the role of the Creator God as representing the destruction of all Christian thought for all time. So, the thing is, you can have this Creator God play many roles. It could just be the watchmaker God, right? This is the God who starts the universe going like a great clockwork. This is the God supposedly vindicated by Big Bang Theory. He's the being outside our universe that pulled the trigger and started the whole show going. And then what he does, he just let things unfold naturally. You can have a creator God who's not an active interventionist God right now. That works out just fine. And this, though, is a God, the creator God, that's very difficult for the Christians to deny. Because, when you open their holy book to the very first page, that's what it's all about. And often these Christians are the kinds of Christians who've never read beyond the first page. So that's their God, is the one who snapped his fingers, said, this is good, and made everything. Now, this creator God could have been any of a number of things. It could have been the God of Christianity poofing the world into existence over 6 days. Just magic, poof, there it is. Or it could have been, as I'm just proposing an alternative hypothesis here. I know there are advocates of the flying spaghetti monster who will be offended that I do not mention this. Okay, that's one alternative. My favorite is that the start of everything could have been aliens visiting the planet in a nuclear-powered Winnebago, the space Winnebago, 3.8 billion years ago, and they had a sort of picnic and they threw out a moldy sandwich, and that's what started all complex life on Earth. This is a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. Why were you laughing? And you weren't laughing when I mentioned the God of Genesis. These are equivalent hypotheses. They have just as much evidence for each one. That is diddly squat, right? There is no reason to propose either of these alternatives, except that, okay, there's a holy book that talks about the book of Genesis, that includes the book of Genesis, and I'm familiar with moldy book, space bologna sandwiches. That's just the way it is. Now, what these represent is posited entities. The bearded giant in the sky, or the decaying sandwich, and hypothetical circumstances which could have been the beginning of our creation. There isn't any reasonable evidence for any of them. But heck, they're at least hypotheses, right? They're wild speculation thrown out that we could then test. They're sort of positive suggestions. They're targets for study. And until we had Darwin, we didn't have anything. Well, not quite. I mean, ultimately, there was no reason to suggest either of these possibilities. And so they had equal explanatory power. That is, no explanatory power whatsoever. But at least they were something. What we have is a growing body of evidence. We have reason on our side. We right now have a powerful model of the universe that made the creator God and the space sandwich both equally superfluous, irrelevant to all of our arguments. Now, this is the sentiment most perfectly expressed by a guy named Simon Pierre Laplace. You've probably heard of him, right? All you statisticians and mathematicians and scientists, yeah, he's a very common sort of guy. In the early years of the 19th century, about the time Darwin was being conceived and born, so before Darwin, Laplace put together models of the solar system to describe its motions. And without the need for any external agency to be directing, maintaining, or controlling them. He had assembled a picture of a universe ruled by common forces and matter. Nothing supernatural at all. And these words come from a famous anecdote where he presented these to Napoleon, was very impressed, and he asked him where God was in his books. And Laplace simply replied, he had no need of that hypothesis. By which he meant that mundane familiar forces were adequate to describe the behavior of whole planets, and no supernatural forces needed to be invoked. He had no need of that hypothesis. Are you people aware how powerful a statement that is? It sounds like he's just sort of waving it away, but he's saying something much more profound, much more important. What he's saying is that there's no point to adding a superfluous variable to the description of the phenomenon. It might make you feel good to throw God in there, but it does not increase the power of the description. It's an empty variable. He's saying that God is empty as part of this explanation. He's saying that unless you can provide evidence of phenomena that impose additional complications, requiring the addition of new mechanisms, there's no point to throwing in a God. The burden is on you, Mr. Napoleon, to find a necessity to increase the complexity of the explanation. Laplace was doing what good scientists do. He pared away all the irrelevancies to get to the core of the answer and discovered something elegant and beautiful and mathematical. And what he's saying when he says he does not need this hypothesis is he's saying that adding God makes the explanation less elegant and less beautiful. Yes, God is uglifying. We don't want him in our hypotheses. He sucks. And to a scientist, that's a very powerful statement. This is what we're looking for in our explanations of the world, that they're simple and clean and explain what they're intended to explain and don't require lots of redundant crap thrown in there to account for unobserved, unevidence, unsupported phenomena. Similarly, there's another of my favorite pre-Darwinian writers, Percy Shelley. He wrote this beautiful, tightly reasoned essay. It's called A Refutation of Deism. I highly recommend that you read it. It's available right now in Hitchens' book, The Portable Atheist, which you all have copies of, right? Yes. If you don't, get on Amazon and order it down. It's really good. Lots of powerful historical arguments for atheism are right there in there. And this is one of the best. It's really a gorgeous argument, where what he does is carefully refute all of the things like Paley's argument for design in 1814. That's how dead intelligent design is, okay? It was killed in 1814 by a poet of all things. Okay, so this is the state. Anyway, it's a beautiful sort of thing. And what he's doing is he's basically saying that there's a lack of necessity for a divine being, and the absence of arguments for a creator God exists. There are no arguments that support him properly. So look it up. You should download it. Read it. And Shelley wrote this, of course, when Darwin was 5 years old. So again, I have to reject one part of Dawkins' statement, and you certainly could be an intellectually fulfilled atheist long before the publication of The Origin of Species. There's a part where I do agree with Darwin, or with Dawkins, and this is it. Before Darwin, a theist could say to you, I believe a magic man in the sky poofed people into existence. What's your explanation? And a scientist or thinker of any sort could easily reject the first part. Okay, that man poofing things into existence, you've got no reason to believe that. There's no evidence for that. That's a very silly thing to believe. We could chew that to bits. And lots of intelligent people did. But the second part was, what's your explanation? I don't know. We don't have a hypothesis even. And that's kind of frustrating intellectually, right? So this is where Darwin plays a role, is he was able to come along and he could propose this nice explanation, an explanatory hypothesis that was much better than anything anyone else had to offer. It actually made testable predictions, for instance. So right now what we can do is we can say things like, I believe people evolved from non-human primates and further from fish and single-celled organisms by a gradual process of natural transformation over hundreds of millions of years. And best of all, right after that, we can pull out about 1,000 books, plump them in front of somebody and say, here's where all the evidence is cataloged. So we now have that positive explanation. It is the best explanation available. And of course, on top of that, the physicists out there, they go back further than biology does. I'm sorry, life on Earth began 3.8 billion years ago, which leaves a roughly 10 to 11 billion year gap there that we don't have anything to do with because there was no life around. But the physicists will tell you how the sun and the planets condensed out of clouds and gases, and how the gases were the detritus of explosions of previous stars, and how we can track everything back mathematically to a point about 14.6 billion years ago. Every step natural, every step material causes, nothing supernatural invoked. It just takes us all the way back to that beginning, and we can measure and we can calculate and we can understand. And God, we have no need of that hypothesis. No need at all in biology or physics. But here's the thing. That creator God, the God of origins, isn't the God most people are thinking about. Yeah, I just told you, that's, you open the Bible, there it is, first page. And the superficial ones will say, okay, that's where our God is. He's the God who created all things. But creation is just one of his powers. It's a kind of signature move, right? But the majority of theists believe in an activist God, a sustaining God, a God who's doing something essential right now. If the watchmaker God of the deists was actually the being they all worship, if they were all deists, in other words, there would be nothing for us to be fussing over. We'd be done. We could all go home, cancel the conference. Because everyone's just saying, oh, well, there's this part we don't know about, and we're just positing a God that did this. But he doesn't bother us now. He doesn't tell gay people what to do with their penises, right? That's all. That's not part of our God. But of course, it is part of their God, their real God. If there were a deist God, it would be kind of like our great-great-grandparents, where we could be grateful for their existence, because without them we wouldn't be here, all right? We appreciate that. Thanks, yeah, all that. But otherwise, we wouldn't have to worry about it day by day. And we would definitely be comfortable saying, well, great-great-grandma doesn't dictate our politics anymore. She's dead, right, for one thing. And she's kind of old-fashioned in her ways, and so no, we don't do that anymore. But that's not what's happening. Now, the kind of God most of these Christians are envisioning is a God who's actually doing something to enable their lives, and that's something different. That's kind of like the grandparents who've got their controlling fingers on your trust fund or your inheritance, right? And they're busy telling you that you have to live exactly as they do, cautiously, prudishly, and with a proper reverence for their antique morality. Or you won't get a penny. Now there's a God to fear, right? This is one we have to worry about. This is a God with real consequences. And that's what we're dealing with, is people who do believe in a God with immediate consequences. And that's the main concern of most God-fearing people. Creation, that's done. That's part of their mythology. But this God who's telling them where they're going to go after they die, that's a pressing concern. This is the idea of the sustainer God. And it's conceptually different than the creator God. I hope you can appreciate that these are different ways of thinking about God. And the sustainer God, I think, is much more important. But the thing is, of course, that they're all muddled together now, because Christianity has taken their God and evolved it. Once upon a time, what was their God? It was this kind of bloated tribal chieftain type, the long-bearded guy who's telling everybody what to do. And now it's become something omnipotent and all-powerful. I like to compare it to Superman. Really, if you go back to the original Superman, what is he? He's got really thick skin, and he can jump really high, and he's strong, really super strong. He can bend metal bars. That's what they're talking about. And nowadays, of course, when you read Superman, although I have to confess, I haven't read all the changes that have been going on in the Superman comics lately. But anyway, Superman quickly evolved into this strange supernatural being who could fly through space, was so powerful that he could smash asteroids or invading alien fleets, who had, heat vision, that could melt whole planets. He really got super powerful. In the movies, of course, he can manipulate time and space. He's become a god. And that's what's happened to the Christian God. Once upon a time, he was a tough guy who tells one tribe how to live their life and what to chop off of their penises and all this kind of important stuff. And now you talk to Christians, and what is God? God is the omnipotent ruler of the entire cosmos, who's still telling us to do the same things, but he's bigger. Okay, this is a case of superpower bloat. We saw that in Superman. We're seeing it in God nowadays. But still, it's this concept that there's a God who's watching over you and doing things and keeping you alive, and who you have to placate if you want to survive longer. That's what we're dealing with. It causes the same story problems as the superpower bloat in Superman, too. it just feels kind of strange to be asking this much. Why am I asking the omnipotent ruler of the universe to restock my toilet paper supply? It's like, you'd think he has better things to do. I want to talk about one thing, though, one particular example of Christians asking their God to do everything, and it's current. They can't deny it. It's happening right now. They know in their hearts that every prayer is a petition to their God to do something. It is a recognition that God is more than just a watchmaker. Their own actions are not sufficient. They have to ask their God to help them with everything, every damn little thing. And the one example I want to mention is the London Olympics. Have you tried to watch this thing? It's terrible. No, I mean, the athletes, fine. They're excellent competitors. They train, they've been disciplined, they've worked hard. They're doing this stuff and doing things I can't imagine doing it all in my flabby old body. I'm very impressed with that. But of course, the narrators are absolutely absurd. And the stories they tell themselves are agonizing because a lot of them are talking about God and their athletic accomplishments, which is bizarre. Okay, so what are they thinking here? Well, let me give you some examples of what you can find. For instance, did you know that the Church of England has an official prayer for the Olympic Games? It's a fairly innocuous prayer. They're just saying some mild things like, pray for those who prepare for the London Olympic and Paralympic Games, whatever that means. They're saying that God is the giver of joy and the source of all strength, which is very peculiar. All you godless people, how weak do you feel right now? Just think you could be in the Olympics if only you believed in God. But it's a bizarre thing. Why are they doing this? What difference do they hope to make? What change does this accomplish in the world? I don't know. I don't understand what's going on in their heads. It's a bizarre thing. Then it gets more and more bizarre. I mean, there's the Bishop of Dorchester who has got this plan. What he's done is he has invited people to his church and he hands them bells. And they sit there and they make an unholy din for minutes on end. And this is somehow supposed to support the Olympics. Tell me, how? What's this doing? I mean, is this some kind of magic power behind noise? It's he's put together bell ringing teams. Not Olympic bell ringing teams. We really have to worry if the Olympics ever have bell ringing teams. Put together bell ringing teams that are supposed to gather in churches and make this unholy racket, which somehow gets translated into greater safety for the teams, or more victories for the English, or something, I don't know. It's not clear at all what this is supposed to accomplish, but there he is, chattering away about this. And then, of course, you can always look at the individual athletes. Again, I don't want to criticize their accomplishments, all right? Yes, they're doing this great stuff. They're working hard. That's great. But sometimes what's going on in their heads, I just don't get. This is, let's see, who is this? This is Jennifer Nichols. She's in women's archery. And she apparently expects Jesus to steady the aim of her arm. I'm sitting here trying to figure what's the mechanics of this. And, if doping is illegal, shouldn't divine assistance Here we are, we've got these people, they're, again, great athletes who are not giving credit to their own discipline, their own training, their own strength. They're giving it to an imaginary man in the sky who just comes down and, I don't know, wiggles neurons or something, or shakes their hand, or grabs the arrow and runs real fast from the target. I don't know. Sort of stuff. There it is. It's all over the place. Another example, this is an organization called Athletes in Action. 3 words, it really should be 2. Athletes in Action. But what they were promoting is, they were again forming teams. They're making Olympic prayer partners. If you apply to this group, what they would do is they would assign you 4 random athletes. They just pluck the names of athletes out of a list, and they tell you, go pray for them. Again, what does this do? You know, if I were a deity, I'd be kind of insulted. You don't know this person. You don't care about the Croatian gymnastics team. You don't even watch them on television. You're telling me I have to go help this person do something? What? That's bothersome. And then, of course, you also got to feel really bad for the people who get assigned the names of 4 losers, right? They're watching the Olympics, they're praying their hearts out, and these guys lose. And are they supposed to take the blame? I didn't pray hard enough. Yeah, it's all my fault. If only, you know, I have lots of problems with these prayers. One is just this ridiculous picture of a God who needs prodding to do some vague something about an athletic event. They're not even specific. Make him win? No, they kind of know that's kind of offensive. But what is he supposed to do? And you know, at the same time, they're organizing these people to do what they claim, what they believe deep down in their hearts are effective ways to promote something or other. They're asking to do this for wealthy, coddled athletes who are all being taken very well care of by the British government, while at the same time, of course, there are children starving in Somalia. Yeah, we ought to subvert these prayer teams. We all, okay, no, we're going to give you the names of random children in Africa, and you're going to pray that they survive. Of course, then you'd really feel bad when they die of starvation or dysentery, but you know. Yeah, I guess you'd actually feel worse than if somebody lost a gold medal, right? But, okay. Now, the thing is that just as Laplace had an explanation for how the solar system formed and sustained itself that depended only on natural and physical laws, with no place for a God to push things along, so too do biologists have an understanding of the mechanics of how your body works, of how the body of these athletes work. And there's no place in it for God's input. Once again, we have no need for that hypothesis. Now, I suppose I could take my remaining time here and just give you the entirety of biology right there in your laps, right? Y'all want to learn everything about anatomy, physiology, genetics, biochemistry, evolution, right? Right? Yeah. Sure. I can't, sorry. You have to pay me big money tuition at the University of Minnesota Morris, then maybe, yeah, I'll teach you all those things, right? I promise, really. So I'm just going to focus on one fundamental point today, and that is that simply, you have to understand this, life is chemistry. That's all it is. What this means is that when you focus on how an individual organism works, what you find is that we're all of us products of chemistry and physics. Now, I hate to give this thought to chemists out there. If there are any chemists out here, don't get too egotistical. Don't get too arrogant. Because organismal biology is really just the study of a narrow subset of complex chemical reactions. And we all use the same conceptual toolkit as chemists. Nothing in biology violates any of the principles of chemistry. The one thing you can say that's kind of a detriment to us is we study those parts of chemistry that seems to exclude all the really cool explosions. You know, we study like how things rot, which just is not as exciting as the Mythbusters blowing something up in chemistry. But let me give you an example of what biology does embrace, and embraces right along with chemistry, and that is the laws of thermodynamics, which you all have memorized, right? You all know the mathematical formulas behind these, so I don't need to tell them to you. We'll just spare you that. Or at least you're all vaguely familiar with them. If nothing else, most of you have heard the second law of thermodynamics because creationists keep bringing it up and saying, oh, second law of thermodynamics disproves all of evolution, which isn't true. You'll see why that's false in just a moment. But let me just go through these laws really quick. The first law is straightforward. The way I think of it, you know, the law there is energy can be changed from one form to another, but it can't be created or destroyed. Think of it this way, is that when you're looking at a reaction going on, looking at something in the real world going on, it has a budget. That there's a certain amount of energy available for these reactions. Any energy you add to one reaction has to be subtracted from another. You've got a spreadsheet, you're doing the budget analysis of this, and everything at the end has to add up. If it doesn't, something is wrong with your calculations. You know, if you're balancing your checkbook and you discover at the end that there's $100 less in your checking account than was actually listed in your checkbook, you say, oh, there's something wrong with my calculations. You don't say, oh, God must have needed a really big sandwich and a deduction when I wasn't looking. No, you say there's a problem, there's a miscalculation somewhere, you look it up. Similarly, you know, if you're $100 over, that's almost as bad. You know, you'd rather have that happen than the other way. But you don't assume, oh, well, God really liked me that day and he poofed $100 into my account. No, there's a budget here and it's all got to balance. In the real world, it always balances. And that's what this law of thermodynamics says, is pluses and minuses all add up to zero at the end. The second law, though, is key. Okay, there it says, in all energy exchanges, no energy enters or leaves the system. The potential energy of the state will always be less than that of the initial state. In other words, that entropy increases over time. Now, I have a simpler way to understand this. The simple summary of the second law in English is everything rolls downhill. And let me tell you how I get this one. In high school, I lived in a town called Kent in the Green River Valley in Washington State. And it literally was a valley. There were hills to the east of me, there were hills to the west of me. And there was this one hill called James Hill. If you ever go to Kent, you ought to look it up. It's impressive. It's a straight road right to the top of one of the hills in town. And it goes like 3/4 of a mile, and it's a 3 or 4% grade. It is just grueling if you're going up it. Now, going up is a killer. I had to go up it a lot because it turned out I lived on the valley floor and my girlfriend lived at the top of James Hill. Motivation, right? I had to get up there. Now, going up the hill was really tough. I'd bicycle there, and no, I could not. I'm sorry, I was never in the kind of shape where I could bicycle at the top of this hill. I'd get started, and I'd have to walk it the rest of the way. It was that tough. But the counter part of this was that going home was terrifying. I had to check my brakes very carefully. I wore a helmet and everything, because by the time you got to the bottom of the hill, you'd be doing 40 miles an hour easy without even pedaling once. And things just whizzing by, and then you gotta hit the brakes, and you sure hope they stop, because there's a cross street and a stoplight down there. It's a very busy street, and I just knew I was gonna die in front of a truck. But girlfriend at the top of the hill, that's all that mattered. So here's where the second law of thermodynamics comes in, because I could pedal to the base of that hill every single day and wait and wait and wait, and I'd never spontaneously start rolling up the hill. Surprise. I had to do the work to get to the top. I couldn't just hope, well, okay, this is the day when, just by accident, you just roll that way. Thermodynamics says no, it don't. Everything goes downhill. If you want to go uphill, you have to expend energy to go uphill. So, you know, the converse, of course, was true. You get to the top, and I'd be sitting there attaching my helmet and checking my brakes, and one little nudge, and whoa, I'm screaming down the hill. So that was different. Downhill, easy, uphill, hard. Obvious, right? You all figured this out back when you were much younger, right? Okay, what about third law? Third law says that all processes cease as temperatures approach absolute zero. That just means, yeah, there's a bottom. There's an absolute bottom that you have to get to eventually. You can't go any farther than that. Now, these rules are never, ever broken. If you're going to invoke God to manipulate the chemistry of an athlete, you are asking that the laws of thermodynamics be violated. Plain and simple. That's what you're asking for. Break the laws of thermodynamics, oh God. Which seems, now that's starting to seem like a very big thing to ask. Just to have your favorite track star go, 0.03 seconds faster. But that's what you're asking for. And meanwhile, the biologists and the chemists are all saying that the behavior of the human body fits these principles just fine. We have no need of another hypothesis to explain what's going on in the body of that athlete running down the track. But let's get specific. Lunch is all settled, right? You're not going to puke when I show you this? Right? You're all okay so far? No panic attacks? I sometimes have them when I see this. No, I vividly remember taking biochemistry my junior year of college, and I had my apartment papered with these things because, not just this one, but lots of them, because we were expected to memorize every step of this. So yes, that's what you have to do, is quickly look at this, and like Brian Dunning asked you to remember these numbers. I want you to memorize every step of the citric acid cycle right now. Go. Okay, don't. I won't. I'm teasing. I'm not as mean as Brian. Let's simplify this. Let's get this down to just what this does. What the citric acid cycle is, and this is appropriate for somebody from Minnesota, it's the wood chipper of the cell. That's really all it is. It's the big wood chipper. Here's what it does. You see, you take a sugar molecule is 6 carbons long, and you snap it in half. Okay. Imagine it's a stick, just break it in half. And when you do that, you're releasing some energy, which is captured in the form of other chemical bonds that you can use in other things. So you snap this thing in half, so now you've got these 3 carbon fragments. And you take these 3 carbon fragments and you toss them in at the top of the wood chipper up there. And what happens then is that there's some chemical arrangements that take a little energy. We burn some of the energy we created when we snapped it in half. And what we do is we modify it slightly. We add something called acetyl-CoA on it. It's kind of a carrier for this thing we're throwing in the wood chipper. And we also snap off 1 carbon, which again releases energy. That carbon is thrown away as carbon dioxide. That's what you're breathing out right now. You throw that away, but you gain a little energy, so it's all fair. And then you do the cool thing, which is now you've got this 2 carbon fragment. And over there on the left, I don't have a pointer. Okay. There's something over there called labeled oxaloacetate, which is a 4 carbon molecule. You've got this 2 carbon molecule. You stick 2 carbon on the 4 carbon, and you end up with a 6 carbon molecule called citric acid. That's why it's called the citric acid cycle. And then what happens in the wood chipper is this goes through, and we snap off another carbon, more energy, throw it away as carbon dioxide. We snap off a 2nd carbon. Now we're back down to the 4 carbon molecule. We throw the carbon away as carbon dioxide. We've got energy. And then you oxidize this molecule in various ways, each step getting more energy for you. And the cool thing is, at the very end of it, you end up back with oxaloacetate. So that's why it's a cycle, because you just keep going through this thing. You don't use up any of those components there. What you're doing is you're just burning up sugar, 1 carbon at a time, extracting energy from it. Okay, so this is a lovely cycle. It's really cool. This is how you get energy. Each of these releases of energy is captured in the form of a chemical bond, usually in the form of ATP. You may have heard of this, adenosine triphosphate. We just stick a phosphate bond on a molecule using that energy, and we can later remove the phosphate bond and get the energy back. Or the other thing we do is we oxidize these compounds, the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotides that carry energy elsewhere. And then that energy is used, not in the cycle, but elsewhere for things like fueling the interactions between myosin and actin and generating muscle contractions. So this is the core. This is the core of metabolism. This is what's going on. There's lots of other things that go on too. I'll mention a few of those in a moment. But this is the main thing. We're just turning through this, cycling through the wood chippers, breaking up carbon and generating energy for you. Here's another way of looking at this though. So this is an energy profile of those same chemical reactions. So what we're seeing here is high up means you've got lots of energy in the molecule. Low down means you've got little energy in the molecule. So we start off up there with glucose, the sugar. This is an appropriate comparison. This is my girlfriend at the top of the hill. Okay. Yes, she's very sweet. So that, yeah, sugar. Okay, I'll go with that. And then what you do is you do a little manipulation of the sugar. And you have to actually add a little energy. You're kind of maneuvering things around the way you want them. And then the analogy goes totally off the tracks here, because then you take your girlfriend and snap her in half. No, we don't do that. But you snap the sugar in half. So that step there, that big drop, that first big drop is when you take the sugar, you release some energy by chopping it in two. And then you throw it into the wood chipper. You don't do that to your girlfriend either. Okay? No. Anyway, what we're doing here is we're burning sugar. What you should see is that each of these steps each of these steps, you reduce the energy of the molecule you're working with. So it's all going downhill. There's James Hill for you, right? We're at the top. And then we're going down. Nothing but down. It's all easy. This is the virtue of this thermodynamics approach to the chemistry. But none of this, there's a few little bumps there, but nothing you can't get over. This is largely just plummeting down the hill and thermodynamically throwing away a lot of energy and gaining some of it back in the form of chemical bonds that then you can use in interesting ways. So, this is something, too, that you could imagine reversing. You could go back up the hill, but of course, going back up the hill, you'd have to take all that energy you gain and you have to pump it back in. So it's reversible, but very difficult to reverse because it takes a lot of fuel to do that. And, when I see curves like this, and again, if you look at any chemical reaction, this is a really common thing, is to plot the energy of the reactants as they're going through the reaction. I don't see God there anywhere. I don't see a need for God. Just as when I was going down the hill, well, I might have been screaming for God for other reasons, but no, it's going down the hill. There was no need for divine input to make me go really, really fast downhill. There's no need for divine input to make any of this happen. It's all spontaneous. And all of this is simply another expression of the laws of thermodynamics. There's other things that are going on too as well. Well, let me just mention one other thing. This is a simple principle to understand too if you compare it to this. It's like a water wheel, right? You don't expect magic to fuel a water wheel. What it is falling water. In the case of this particular Krebs cycle reaction, citric acid cycle reaction, it's falling electrons, cascading through these chemical reactions that are generating the energy. And further, these electrons are then passed on to another step. That wasn't, if I could step back a moment, that isn't zero down there at the bottom. You can then take those things like the NADH and so forth, and you can pass it through other really cool reactions like this one. This is the electron transport chain. Again, I won't go through the details of it, but what the electron transport chain does is, first of all, creationists look at that and they say, oh, that's really complicated. God must have created it. They're wrong. Because what this does is something very simple. This is a series of, again, chemical reactions that are running downhill. We've got electrons traveling down the energy path, and what's being done with them is they're being coupled to chemical reactions that pump out protons. So little red circles there, pumping protons out of the mitochondrium in this case, increasing the concentration of protons, and then eventually what happens is the concentration of protons is really high on the outside, really low on the inside. They naturally want to flow back through. That big, bulky, beige structure over there, that's an ATP synthetase. And it's basically a turbine. It's a turbine driven by protons. So this is being driven by this gradient of protons, causes it to spin. As it spins, it's generating energy to make a chemical reaction going, which is to produce more ATP. So isn't that really cool? This is all stuff we know. So this is how the electron transport chain works. It's complex, admittedly. It's lovely. It's powerful. And it's one of those things that intelligent design creationists love to say, okay, well, that had to have been designed. But when they do that, they're missing the flip side of the argument. So here's this intricate, elaborate machinery that, in this case, efficiently extracts every scrap of energy it can from these compounds and pathway. Why are they arguing that their God, at the behest of some praying doofus, will just completely abandon this elegant, clever, complicated scheme and spontaneously go, poof, oh, here's energy for you. I'm violating the first law of thermodynamics. Poof, I'm creating energy for you. Why do we even have this if their sustaining creator God can do that? It's like they believe that God constructed this tool, but hey, when Gabby Douglas needs to make a dismount, just forget that. We're going with divine superpowers. Poof, that's how it's happening. And this is where my brain is going when I hear people saying prayers for athletes. What exactly do they expect to happen? I teach physiology and cell biology, and I have this very clear picture of what's going on during athletic performance. I visualize the metabolism of the cell, turning away to produce high-energy phosphate compounds that are quickly burned to cause proteins like myosin and actin to ratchet together to produce muscle contractions. Yeah, you know all that crap about how the elegance and beauty of their performance? No, I see. Chemical. No, it's all over the place. I picture lungs and hearts working together to deliver about 4 liters of oxygen per minute to the tissues to enable the metabolism that fuels all this. I picture the liver releasing glucose into the circulatory system. I picture coordinated neural firing from these basal nuclei and from the cerebellum that are all driving these kinds of very intricate behaviors. And I see the cortex working away, planning and compensating for changing conditions and anticipating the next move they have to make. This is all very natural, very mechanistic. It's the way it works. And I think that's absolutely lovely. Why do I need to clutter it up with a God? There is no place in there for a God. It would violate the first law of thermodynamics, for one, for a God to interfere, and also because these activities all conform to our second law as well, so any external intervention would be superfluous. Now, let me just toss in one more thing, as long as I'm getting all biochemical on you, just because, here I've just been talking about the comparing this whole metabolism to me plummeting down James Hill. Of course, I also went up the hill. How did I do that? How did we get molecules that are up there in this high energy configuration? How did we get sugars? And so I got to nod a little bit to the plants and thank them for their hard work and mention this thing, photosynthesis. You may have heard of this. Here's a picture of photosynthesis for you. Again, I'm simplifying a lot. What photosynthesis does, it takes the energy of photons, light, and uses it to crack water. It separates hydrogen and oxygen in water to produce chemical energy, which is a cool trick. We have to figure this out. Just think if we could do this, if we could take water, a catalyst, a little energy, sunshine, whatever, and crack water apart to get hydrogen and oxygen. There goes all our fuel shortage problems, right there. Plants figured it out a long time ago. I think we're smarter than plants. We just have to work on it more. Okay, what this is called the Z scheme of photosynthesis, and it uses the energy of photons. So we've got four photons coming in there at the beginning, striking these compounds that are carrying electrons, and it pushes those electrons up the hill. Yes, it's called the Z scheme because whoever designed it, Robert Hill actually, looked at it sideways, I guess. We look at that and say, oh, that's the N scheme, but you don't rotate it 90 degrees, then it's the Z scheme. Anyway, he's a genius, he could get away with it. So anyway, Z scheme. What it does, it takes a total of 8 photons to lose energy. There's no violation of laws of thermodynamics here. The photons lose energy, transfer to electrons that can then be harvested to do things like ultimately take carbon dioxide and fix it into sugars. So the plants are all sitting there doing this to make sugars from carbon dioxide. Now here's the classic diagram. I know it's anthropomorphized cartoon, but okay, it's good. What it's just saying is it requires the input of energy from a known source, light. That's our little man down there at the bottom over there, because the hammer is light, as you can see from the Planck symbology right there on his hammer. Light smacks something, and it throws the proton or electron up to a higher energy state, and then it gets passed down through our typical turbine. These things are all over in the cell. Spinning that turbine to produce energy, produces ATP out of that, and then there's a second step where another set of photons are used to promote it to another level, and then it gets transferred on into NADH. So it's a bit more complicated than you might expect because there are 2 photosystems here and 2 phases of electron promotion, but the results are the same. And it's also, I should say, a great story of evolution and how these 2 systems were generated to produce complementary results. But I won't get into it today unless you ask me questions about it. That's a story to refute a creator God, and I'm just talking today about the actions of the sustainer deity and how it was completely irrelevant and unnecessary. And that's really the message I want you to take away from this. There are broadly 2 prongs of the biological refutation of the necessity of a God. I will emphasize this is not a disproof of God. It's just simply saying, who needs him? We have adequate, if incomplete, explanations of the origin of life and features of modern organisms that requires no intervention of a deity. Charles Darwin did make a significant contribution to the intellectual fulfillment of atheists by providing an explanation that required no intervention of a deity. We have no need of the God hypothesis. The creation was not supervised. It happened naturally. We also have adequate, if incomplete, explanations of the operation of living creatures that requires no vital spark, no magic boost from an invisible man, that fully conform to natural principles and further require those principles of thermodynamics to operate. This is an accomplishment of many scientists, chemists, physicists, and biologists working since the early years of the 19th century to provide a coherent, material explanation of how we work. And again, we have no need of the God hypothesis. The operation of these processes was not supervised. So this is what I want you to take away from this. This is what we've learned from modern biology and chemistry. And that is that everything is bottom up, nothing is top down. If you have any knowledge of any of the many branches of biology, you know that God is an utterly superfluous and irrelevant parameter to throw into our understanding of life. Life is chemistry, not theology. And with that, I think I've got time to take any questions.
Yeah, we got some time.
Okay.
Nice, elegant, I'm convinced, I think we all are. Have you convinced any believers with this kind of thing? I mean, that's the problem. People don't react to fact or to data.
Yeah, and like I said, there's no such thing as a disproof of God, because God can be anything. You can invent and do any little step you want, and you can say He's doing it when you're not looking. He's like the elves that came up and left the milk that you left on the stew at midnight, right? You cannot disprove that. But what you can do, what science has consistently done in the last couple of centuries, is show that we have more powerful explanations that do not need that deity. And the people who matter, the people who are doing science, learn this pretty quickly. This is why there's an awful lot of atheists in science. Is not because their science sat down and said, oh, there is no God. It's here's thermodynamics. Isn't this so much cooler than God? And in my case, here's evolution. Evolution is so much more impressive and powerful than God. And we say, okay, forget the God thing. We'll do our own thing, which is much more fun. Okay.
You mentioned that you somewhat disagree with Richard Dawkins and said how about the evolution making it possible to be intellectually an atheist and whatnot. So anyhow, my point is that you talk about how biology without evolution shows that God's unnecessary, but you have to admit that it's also true that nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution.
Right. Here's the thing that in Dawkins' statement, he's confining himself to a very narrow argument, which is how did it come to be? And he's saying, yeah, you need Darwin to understand how things came to be. And I'm just saying, no, there's a whole bunch of scientists who arrive at the conclusion there is no need for a God by an entirely different pathway. Didn't even consider the origins of how these things came to be. But at the same time, as I mentioned, in the case, for instance, of the origin of photosynthesis, once you understand photosynthesis, you don't need gods or angels or anything pushing electrons around. This is adequate. But it's still kind of cool to know where it came from. That you want to understand, people were asking for a long time, why are there two photosystems? Why are they linked this way? How did those possibly arise, since you need both of them to carry out the full processes of photosynthesis? And there you needed to do evolutionary studies to figure out why it was that way. So, yeah, ultimately it all gets interlinked into this question of causation. But I'm just saying that, yeah, you don't have to consider evolution to come up with good reasons to ignore God.
Well, you said that the advantage of evolution was that it gave us an alternative explanation to the, well, we got this big guy in the sky who did it, what do you got? All right, well, but you see, before Darwin, there were positive alternative explanations that were sort of proto-scientific, such as Epicurus and Lucretius with their ideas of the atoms falling down that just happened to have a swerve, and they started bumping into each other, and then everything happened after that. Or the Stoics and their idea of the universal conflagration and all of this energy spreading around by itself. So they had by itself ideas as well. They just weren't as refined and scientific. Right. So what Darwin offered was a scientific explanation, not the first alternative positive one.
Well, Darwin did provide the first explanation that it accounted for a number of other phenomena. That, for instance, all those Greek philosophers had great ideas for how things could spontaneously arise, but they did not adequately explain the relationships between all the organisms we see. What Darwin did is it was really twofold. I mean, he's got an explanation for the similarities and dissimilarities of organisms on the planet. And the key thing, that made him really different from the philosophers, is he went out and got evidence for it.
Hello.
Hi.
What I'd like to ask is, like, how will you feel when it comes to the time, like later in the future, when we are basically gods in a sense, where it's like, well, the reason it happens is because like we made it, like things like the Hearn Super Collider and cloning and all these things, like when the mirror is reflected on us and it's like, oh, well, why does life happen? So because we made it. Like, how does this argument, like, how can we be okay with calling ourselves gods at a later date?
I thought I was already a god.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, we are.
Okay. Yeah, no, then what that's saying is that there are many paths to achieve these ends. That the life we see on the planet right now is the product of entirely natural, unguided processes. That does not imply that it is impossible to have guided processes. And what we're doing now is developing a technology that allows us to shape the life around us. And what we'll see is, this is already producing things that we wouldn't expect, that would be indications of design in life. That, for instance, Craig Venter, who recently created life in the laboratory, well, he synthesized the DNA and stuck it in a cell and got it to reproduce and all this. He did things like, he encoded his name in the sequence, right? That's kind of a giveaway. I want to see Jesus was here. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. But also what we see with these kinds of technological approaches is a mixing and matching that isn't normally done in advanced life, sophisticated like plants and animals, where you can take the attributes of two different characters, two different organisms, and make a chimera from them. That would be another indicator that we've reached the Darwinian evolutionary barrier. So there'll be signs of these things. That's okay. That fits in just fine with the scheme. And of course, we also say, well, the other thing is our brains are the product of evolutionary history too, so it's indirectly caused by natural processes. And of course, the key thing is none of these things involve the supernatural. It's not the Catholic Church that will make these breakthroughs, right? I'd be kind of impressed if they got the Council of Archbishops together and they said, oh, we will create a new organism. They all sit around praying and prove something. But then I'd have to say, okay, I guess I'm converting. But they don't do that. They can't.
My question is, as you mentioned about people praying to suspend laws of nature for something unnatural to happen, like you mentioned about athletes in the Olympics. If God were to listen to their prayers and cause change of laws of nature, then that would make God an unethical being. And an unethical being by nature is not worth worshiping, right?
Okay, but again, the ethics is a little bit fluid here, right? I mean, what if God made all the Christian athletes win all their events and all the atheists lose all their events? That would, if you believe that Christianity is the source of all this morality, then you'd say, well, that was the ethical thing to do, right? punish those atheists. So I can't argue from what is to what ought, which is what you're asking me to do. But won't do that. Won't work. Okay. Thank you all.